Hey everyone, welcome to the first Life Skills for Fanboys podcast. Normally I do this as a column on Superfrat, but my good friend CB is here with her podcast rig, and we decided to do a podcast. And the theme tonight is Peak Geek and what that means. We were talking about Game of Thrones and Star Wars and various things, and we came to the conclusion that we have reached peak geek for a number of reasons.
There's nowhere else to go except down from here.
Yes, yes, and part of the problem is, and I said this in Life Skills for Fanboys columns previously. Be careful what you wish for, fanboys, because everyone for many years wished, oh, if only comics were popular enough so they could make movies about them. If only fantasy was popular enough so that they would make a great TV series or movie about that. And now we have it, and we're seeing the deterioration of these media because all the faux geeks are now getting in on it. All the people who just get on everything that's popular are clamoring on it like leeches, sucking us dry, and all the cool stuff that we enjoy, and ruining it because of focus groups.
Yes, it's that's true. It is very, very true. It does feel like you're watching movies that are created, to please focus groups. It's very strange.
That's how they're shooting movies now, right? The DC universe, they shot the Aquaman movie. What did they shoot? Like 9 versions of the movie, and same thing with the Justice League movie. They actually now budget money in to reshoot the movie after shooting it once and then showing it to a focus group and then getting their cards back or whatever, and then they go back and they go, okay, let's redo this scene and that scene and this scene. I mean, it must be a nightmare for the creators. I can't imagine.
Well, they've always had test screenings in Hollywood to gauge what the audience might like, and they've done changes before, but not to this extent. Not to the extent too that they have to spend millions of dollars to correct CGI shots or have Superman's mustache digitally removed. I mean, it's pretty bonkers out there. But to backtrack to where this all sort of began. You grew up in the 70s. I came up late 70s into the 80s. So you and I both saw a lot of cool stuff during that time, and in those magazines. Back, the trade magazines, now it's all on the internet, but back then it was in print. You would see articles about, the comic book movies that might get made, especially when Batman came out in 1988, which was one of the first instances that I can remember where, general people on the street were, excited about a comic book movie, and you started to see everybody wearing, Batman t-shirts, and then, even back then, I thought to myself, if this became, quote-unquote normal, it's not going to be cool anymore. If everybody's doing it, then, it's going to be, it's going to suck.
Yeah, and that's the ironic thing, right? It's like this stuff all became popular with people who weren't cool because you would read this as a geek and you were kind of marginalized in the world because of that, right?
Well, I remember bringing Watchmen to my junior high school growing up, the single issues, and trying to get people to read it. And they're like, well, what's this comic? What's this blue guy with his dong hanging out? This is really strange, And made fun of, you get picked on. Remember, I had a copy of The Dark Knight Returns on the bus. I was reading it. This guy took a pen and goes, "This is stupid," and it just scratched my cover of the trade paperback. I mean, it was rough growing up as a geek. So to see it now, to see jocks even talk about Game of Thrones, or people everywhere wearing Star Wars T-shirts, it's pretty wild.
Yeah, and we had these discussions back in the day about Star Wars because Star Wars was so popular, and the thinking was at that time, well, when jocks like science fiction, they like Star Wars. But when real geeks like science fiction, they like Star Trek. And because that was like, you know, the higher end at the time. That was still when Star Trek was just the first series and it was just on reruns and no one really watched it except people who were really into sci-fi. But now you have sort of the masses into it, and I blame partly the Big Bang Theory for that because they made kind of being a geek. They didn't make it cool. They just made it in. Like it's the in thing now. Like it's the new thing we have to exploit because everybody's doing it and everybody's, you know, sucked into the popularity. And you know, when I was a kid and I was playing Dungeons and Dragons with my friends, my parents would chastise me constantly. Like, why don't you guys go do something? Why don't you go outside? Why don't you go chase girls? Do anything but play that stupid game. But my parents love the Big Bang Theory. And they watch guys do all the stuff I used to do. But rather than go, oh, that's stupid, they laugh at it and they think it's like hilarious that those guys are that geeky, which I don't get at all. I don't get it. The Big Bang Theory is the Amos and Andy TV show for geeks. If geeks were a race, that would be the most racist TV show on television, The Big Bang Theory.
It's an affront to nerds everywhere. That show has done so much just to damage nerd culture, geek culture, whatever you want to call it. It has set us back at least 50 years.
Yeah, well, everything that's happening now really has. I mean, you look at Game of Thrones, and we were talking about Game of Thrones for a while.
Which is still a good show, not a great show,
right?
But a good show.
Yeah, let's lay out our theory on that.
Well, before we get into that, let's just lay out how we feel about the franchises we're going to talk about. The big three, so to speak. Game of Thrones, Star Wars, and Marvel Universe.
Okay.
Those are the big three at the moment. And I thought the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones were awesome, and it declined a bit, and it's picked up a little bit here at the end. Star Wars, I was a huge fan of Star Wars growing up. I even watched the prequels, each one of them 2 times at a movie theater. I am a fan of the prequels, and I am a fan of Rogue One, which came out, but I am not a fan of The Last Jedi. I think that set the franchise back in a big way. Hopefully, you know, with the Rise of Skywalker, they can end the saga, you know, on a high note. So, you know, still sort of big Star Wars fan there, with a few exceptions. And then as for Marvel, I've seen all the movies. You know, I enjoy them. There's a few that weren't that great, but there's a few that were, like, I think close to being, you know, high-level cinema, namely The Winter Soldier. That was an amazing movie. So those are my thoughts on it. I'll pass it to Tony D.
Generally, I agree with your assessment. I would add that Star Wars, first 3 movies, and that's it for me. I mean, I remember when people were complaining about Return of the Jedi and the Ewoks. I mean, I'm still sort of not on board with them. I kind of tolerated them because it was the end.
Well, how many years ago was that? That was like 36 years ago now. Have you forgiven the Ewoks yet?
No, I haven't.
36-year grudge.
Stupid. They're giant teddy bears, and it was a cash grab. But because it was the end, quote unquote, I tolerated it. You know, their wacky song at the end of the damn movie, and
well, they changed that for the special editions. The nub nub.
Okay, look, and the special editions infuriate me. I saw the recut of the first one. It's a nightmare. It throws off the pacing. I knew we were in trouble the moment I saw that in the theaters, and the first prequel was coming out next year. I said, oh, this does not bode well. And then I saw the first prequel, and I threw up my hands, walked out of the theater. I'm out. I'm done. This is it for me. So I've been out of Star Wars since then. I haven't
since the prequels.
Since the first prequel.
Since the first prequel. Yeah, well, we wrote about that.
Pod race bullshit. What is that?
We wrote about that in our book Dealers. which is available on the Webcomic Factory. Go to thewebcomicfactory.com and read Dealers. It's a 128-page book drawn by Nick Ramo, an amazing Italian artist that Marvel and DC should hire.
Yes, they should.
That was about our toy dealing days, because Tony D and I, back in the day, used to deal action figures and comic books and stuff, and it dives into that world. So we do have a pretty long history with all of these properties, and we both watched Game of Thrones since the beginning. I know I watched it since episode 1 and followed it all the way through as it came out. I remember talking with Tony D each season about what was happening, like certain characters would come and go. It took us a long time to even remember their names. Like, who is that? Like, I didn't know Gendry's name until like 2 seasons ago. Like, who is that guy? And stuff. And so, but we've been there since day one with that. Not day one for the books, though. I don't think either one of us have read the books.
No, the first 3 seasons, to me, are perfect. The 4th season is where it starts to slip a little. And then after that, it becomes TV because they just run out of books. And the TV guys, they did what they could. I mean, those middle seasons kind of really sag. But you know.
A couple high points, namely the episode Hard Home, where the White Walkers, spoilers, attack the Wildling camp. That was a really excellent episode. But yeah, it did drag. There were some episodes that weren't great.
Yeah, and but you know, now people are complaining about it, and it's like,
well, yeah,
we started complaining about that back in season 5 because we could see the drop off, but most people couldn't see the drop off, or they're fair weather fans. They jumped on this, they binged watched. Oh no, I got to see the last season of Game of Thrones. It's like, well, you haven't been here since the beginning,
and now they're polluting places like Facebook and Twitter and everywhere.
Polluting's a good word for it.
Yeah, they're just sending out their ideas about it, writing about it, criticizing it, moments after it happens, sometimes criticizing it while they're watching the show, what's called live tweeting. They're tweeting along with the show, like, sometimes you gotta let things sit for a couple days before you say something, and that's not happening. So in the era of Peak Geek, we've had years to think about these franchises, as they call them.
These people have no street cred. They have none. They have no geek school cred at all. They should be opening their mouths. And I'll tell you this: they'll be on to the next thing. I mean, we were out with my dog, and we ran into this woman on the street in my neighborhood. And she had 2 other dogs. And I said, "What's the name of your dogs?" And she said, "Trooper," after Stormtrooper, and Rey, after the Star Wars character who shall forever be nameless to me, that Mary Sue. Yes, she's a Mary Sue.
She doesn't bug me. I mean, she doesn't really... I don't think of her either way. Like,
it's dumb character.
I know it bugs Tony. It's dead to me. I mean, I kind of look at the new trilogy as like fan fiction.
Yeah.
So if it's fan fiction, it's mildly entertaining to me. I'm not going to be like writing articles about it on the internet.
But my point is, this woman,
I just had to say,
was going on and on about her dogs, named after characters from Star Wars. She's bragging how she can't wait for the last movie to come out. How her and her husband and her kids are going to go to, who has Star Wars land? I assume Disney.
They're going to Disney World, and then they're going to go back with her and her husband separately to enjoy it without the kids. So it's with the kids, one trip, and then without the kids, the second trip.
And I knew from the moment this woman, and a nice woman, I'm not like saying she's a bad person.
Well, I think what struck us after we walked away, and we're like, we can't escape it right now. You can't even walk down the street without hearing about Star Wars.
Yeah.
And I'm a big Yankees fan. I can't watch, they're having a Game of Thrones night at Yankee Stadium on the 17th, and they're talking about it. you can't escape it. It's permeated into everything.
Yeah, and 10 years ago, if you wind back the clock, that woman, if I had run into her on the street with her dogs and I said, hey, nice to meet you, nice dogs. Oh, by the way, have you seen the new Star Wars movie? Have you read the latest Star Wars novel? She would have looked at me like I was out of my mind. She would be like, Star Wars? No, I'm not into Star Wars. That was the reaction you usually got when you talk to somebody about Star Wars. Like, what is that? Oh, right, that movie.
Or in my case, they look at you at school with your books and stuff. They think of you as a freak, and no one wanted to talk to you back then. They're like, "What is that? Like, why are you reading? What is this Watchmen? What is this Dark Knight? What? Why are you reading all these Dungeons and Dragons books at school? Like, you're weird." And then you just felt like, all right, I'm gonna hide this stuff. And you go back to your room, and everything was hidden back then. You had your own private stuff where you had your couple friends that knew about it that you talked to, and when you found somebody that knew about it, it was like, oh my god, this person knows about it too. That's so awesome that I have somebody to talk to about this. Now everybody's talking about it, and they don't have like
They don't even know. They don't even know the real things. They're just they know the surface things. Right? So she was all about the Emperor Palpatine.
Oh,
She
yeah.
actually used the word Palpatine. And I wanted to say to her, you geek.
Yep.
I just wanted to reverse it for a moment and go, you geek.
Like, you actually know the Emperor's name, really?
Yeah, that would be a reaction I would totally remember from back in the day. Like, how could you even know who that person is, that character is? But this woman is like, a total normie, and she is just everything Star Wars, everything. But that's what's destroying it. She's gonna suck every little bit of fun marrow out of the bones of Star Wars until there's nothing less left but a desiccated husk.
Well, that's what's happening in the Peak Geek era is they are just ripping out the soul of these things, over analyzing them, talking about them. I mean, and then every little thing gets amplified in the Peak Geek era, like this stupid Starbucks cup incident where there was a cup on the table at Winterfell, after the battle. There's a Starbucks cup that was mistakenly left there, and it became national news. It was on CNN's website. My mom texted me and said, oh, it was on GMA this morning. They talked about the Starbucks cup on, Game of Thrones. I'm like, what? Like, why are we talking about this?
It's unbelievable, and now everything has to go woke, like it's slowly happening in the MCU. And I did my rant about Captain Marvel. I hate Captain Marvel. I thought it was a terrible movie, the worst the MCU has come up with. But for the most part, the MCU movies were consistent and wonderful, and I liked them. Now, however, it looks like they're going to transition into the woke universe, where diversity is our strength and apparently our only attribute. Speaking of which, I think I told you I was on Twitter, and one of these comic sites starts tweeting about Quasar, the new Quasar, and the new Green Lantern. Which do you like better? And they were both two women who I'd never heard of. Like, this is now what, the 8th Green Lantern of Earth, and Quasar. I guess it was the 2nd or 3rd Quasar, and it's just like, okay, so what? They're women. Who cares? Like the original characters, if they were women or men, they would have something about them that was interesting. Hal Jordan was a pilot. That was sort of interesting. And then the whole deal was he had a force of will.
Well, speaking of that, I kind of feel that Captain Marvel's origin story borrows a lot from Hal Jordan's origin story.
Oh yeah, it's all Hal Jordan, and it's terrible. There's no upper limit to Captain Marvel's power. It doesn't make any sense. She just got it because there was an explosion. Wow. Wow. What did you spend 10 minutes thinking of that secret origin?
So do you think that Captain Marvel is like the first pure focus group movie of the Peak Geek era, to where this is
Yeah.
like the first movie that signifies we have distilled Peak Geek into its purest form to deliver to the masses, and it is Captain Marvel.
Yes, with today's the caveat being with today's woke culture. There may have been a time in previous years that this still could have happened, but it wouldn't have been woke. It just would have been bad, right? It just would have been so broad, so broadly painted. It would just be not great anymore or not special. But now it's like adding insult to injury. It's not only being made for the masses, but for this faux audience of woke masses, which don't actually exist. They only exist on Twitter and Facebook and some of these other social media platforms that are finally starting to die.
Well, they're showing influence too. That's what I meant by saying this is the first movie that's like a pure focus group, because the influence is coming back into these movies and shifting things around. And I think there was an article where somebody was talking about the problems with representation in the Avengers Endgame movie, and they're talking about Captain Marvel not being represented and a couple other characters. But then the writer revealed that they had not actually seen Captain Marvel yet.
Right, yeah, complaining about a movie you haven't even seen yet.
So these movies that they're creating, to cater to a certain group, the people that they're catering to don't even watch the movies, but they will write about them. They will, complain about them on social media because it gets them attention. And I think that's another thing we could talk about the Peak Geek era. And now that it's happening, and it's happening. I mean, you cannot deny that we're in, as Jim Leahy and Trailer Parks used to say, it is a shitstorm.
Yeah.
Right now, it is a shit storm.
We're surrounded by shithawks.
Shithawks everywhere. It is a shit-tastic shitstorm. So, with that being the case, forgive me. I was just thinking about Jim Leahy. Just as a side note, a comic genius.
Well, you know what? That's an interesting thing, because you look at a show like Trailer Park Boys, which that's what it's from, and if you haven't seen it, you should. There's a universe which is totally consistent all the way through. And it's still a good show. It's still worth watching.
And very diverse.
Yeah.
They have Jim Leahy and Randy. They are two guys on there, and they are gay lovers, and nobody in the park really cares.
Yeah. They've never had an episode where anyone attacked them because they were gay, or anybody even said anything.
Well, they made jokes, but the jokes were part of the story, and it was them because they were friends with them, and they made jokes about it.
And they've known each other for so long.
So it's just like, it made sense. But
it wasn't like they were calling them the F word or anything like that.
Plus, there was Donna, the trans character, on there, and they never really said anything awful to her. She was actually treated like, one of the gals, especially by Barb.
Yeah, and the great thing about those characters, too, they could be bad characters as well as good characters. So, like, one of the things I heard quoted a long time ago about African-American representation in cinema was that we will have equal representation of African Americans in cinema or TV or whatever when we have a black villain. And that's true, because the idea is you're now treating these actors and these characters just as anybody else. They could be good, they could be evil, and it's not about evening the score. It's not about making this political statement in every single story. Now, granted, there are stories like that, but when it comes to science fiction and fantasy, a lot of times there are a lot of tropes that, for the majority of it, that's not where they are. That's not a place where you're going to do a story about civil rights, let's say.
Well, particularly Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Where, since we're in the Peak Geek era, people are now projecting a lot of their agendas onto the show, which takes place in a fantasy world where in an indescript time, it might not even be on Earth. It probably isn't. It's just a world that is a fantasy world. It's medieval. There's swords, there's crossbows, there's dragons. It's like people are now relating Game of Thrones to their own lives instead of just like enjoying the story for what it is.
And the idea that you're going to create a fantasy world that's woke, that's not going to appeal to a lot of people, because part of the milieu of seeing a fantasy world is seeing this medieval world where there are certain rules, and that's one of the rules. Men ran things, and the women were ladies, and they existed in the court, or they raised children. I mean, look, I'm not saying you can't have a good fantasy story that's totally woke, but that's not Game of Thrones. And if you want that story, no one's stopping you from writing the story and making the movie. But that has a much more narrow appeal. You're not going to force wokeness on the masses.
And then in Game of Thrones, the female characters that, live to this last season, that have been successful enough to survive and thrive, as characters in this world, they've earned, they've earned their place. Like when Brienne was made a knight, you're like, that makes sense. She earned the right. Like, oh, why? No one said women can't be knights. Why hasn't there been one? Well, she's the first one. She's the one who's earned it. And after that, nobody was like, oh, great job, Brienne. You broke the stone ceiling here.
I mean, what are they supposed to do? Is everything have to be 2019? I mean, can there not be a past anymore? Like, what next? Are they going to complain, like, if they do a civil rights movie, like, that there aren't equal representation of, like, Asian people in the March for Civil Rights in Selma? I mean, that wouldn't make any sense. I mean, it's a historical movie. There was sexism and racism at different times.
Back to Peak Geek, how that relates is that now that this is such a prevalent part of our culture, the people with agendas are globbing onto these things and trying to use these as examples to push forward whatever ideas they have. And
it's only because these faux geeks got on board.
Yeah,
and it became popular.
Like when we were reading Dark Knight and Watchmen and watching Star Trek back in the 70s and 80s and all, those times, none of this stuff popped up. We were left alone. We just read our stuff. And yeah, there were political... I mean, Watchmen's a very political book. There's a lot of stuff in there. And
in the geek community, there would be discussions.
Yeah, there'd be discussions.
But they were reasonable discussions. They were discussions from fellow fans who were talking about the interesting permutations of various things. Race relations came up on Star Trek and, things like that. But it wasn't this...
It was organically, intertwined into the stories. And it wasn't like those ideas weren't talked about, but they were talked about with respect to the story.
And there was context, too.
Yes.
Everything today is no context because you have all these clickbait journalists who spend 90% of their time trying to come up with a headline that you have to click or get outraged about.
Or these social media outragers on Twitter who preface their tweets with, can we talk about this, like, right now?
And their whole website's dedicated to this, and it's just exhausting people. And it's
that's
creating,
how I feel.
Yeah, it's creating enemies of different... I shouldn't say enemies. What it's doing is it's driving me away from mainstream stuff. Like every comic site that reports about how great comics are just because they're woke, as opposed to this is a great character or this is a great story or this is a great artist. Like, that's not what they're reporting anymore. All the stuff coming out of mainstream comic journalism, except for the guys not doing it and the guys being attacked, like Bounding into Comics, they were kicked off of what, Facebook? Yeah. So Bounding into Comics kicked off Facebook. I didn't give a crap about Bounding into Comics. Now I had to go immediately follow them on Twitter. You see what it does? It causes people to go, well, wait a minute, why are these guys being attacked? You know, it just frustrates me to no end. That
it's exhausting. This whole thing, you know, as someone who enjoys fantasy and science fiction, you know, I'm a major fan of the TV show The Expanse. I mean, I devour that series. I love it. I don't want it to get too popular now, because if The Expanse got too popular, people would start talking about characters like, oh, why, you know, wait a second, they need to pay more attention to Drummer. She's like a character who's diverse and stuff, and she's not getting enough screen time, you know, or why are they giving, you know, so much screen time to this guy or that guy? You know, they're white, you know, the black characters. It's like, I don't care about any of that, and they are in there. The Expanse is a very diverse show. You know, they have Middle Eastern character is the university, you know, the president of Earth, and you know, you've got black characters and Asian characters, and none of this stuff comes up on that show. They're doing their jobs and they're invested in the story. And I don't want, you know, this stuff polluting that.
Sure.
And I worry that when something that you like gets popular, it's going to get, you know, co-opted by people.
And meanwhile, you got the Orville, and I watched the entire first season of the Orville, hoping it would get good, and it kind of, a couple episodes, a couple of scenes were okay, but then the season opener was just so insulting to me. I didn't even get through the whole episode. Just the opening scene was just so stupid and dumb, and that show is woke as hell. That show is like, look how woke we are, and it's just like, who cares? That is, they're wasting their resources on that portion of the show. They should have instead focused their resources on making a good science fiction show, because that's my main complaint about that show. The science is bad.
The Expanse, the science is amazing. I recommend it.
Because that's hard science.
It's great. And plus the story's good.
Right.
And you get invested in the characters, and that's what you want. I mean, that was like the first few seasons of Game of Thrones. The rules of Game of Thrones in the first 3 or 4 seasons were spot on. You got invested in it. You understood what the timing and pace and everything was, why certain things worked in this world, and then there were surprises along the way. You didn't know what to expect from what the characters did, but you understood the world. And that consistency we talk about, you know, now it's lacking in Star Wars, particularly in The Last Jedi.
And Solo.
It doesn't relate to the rest of the universe, and it's because they're bending these stories to fit certain agendas. Yep. And when you do that, you become uncentered, which is what I'm hopeful is going to happen when the Peak Geek era, it's going to explode in everybody's faces. It's not going to be pretty what's going to happen in the next couple of years. I hope that after all the fallout comes down and stuff, people like Tony and I, who are creators of content, can just move ahead and everything can get back to like a nice, firm, like center to where we can just do our work. That's what I would like to see.
Yeah, we're going to be crawling out of the bunker at the wreckage of all this.
It is going to be ugly. This is going to be, the next few years, it's going to, I mean, it already is rough. I mean, like you say, I'm exhausted.
I can't wait for the 4th phase of MCU because it's going to be terrible, in my view. You're looking at trying to push the Marvel characters with Captain Marvel at the helm, already the most hated character. I mean, come on. And you're going to do a sequel? A sequel? You know, this to me is proof that the movie side of it is now being driven by what they think the comic people like, which is totally being driven by ideology.
Yeah, well, thankfully with the MCU, I mean, it wasn't a perfect conclusion. Endgame was nowhere near the level of Infinity War, which Infinity War is probably in my top 3 Marvel movies. It's just a good movie. But beyond that, I'm just happy that they were able to wrap up this, phase of the Marvel Universe in a way that was mostly satisfying. But it felt like they were dragging to the end of something. Like they barely made it. They barely made this happen. I know it's making a lot of money. Everybody, that's another thing with the Peak Geek era, is that everybody's box office crazy. Like all these memes about Endgame overtaking Avatar. Like this is like some victory against Avatar. Avatar, James Cameron, he's fine. He's probably got a really nice house. He's probably got yachts or anything. And he's making 4 Avatar sequels. Good for him. If you want to go see him, great. What is the battle there? Who cares if Endgame overtakes Avatar?
I have to say I care because I hate Avatar. I think it was one of the worst movies ever made. And I'm glad it was overtaken, so at least Avatar's not number 1 anymore. But
I don't care about.
But I'm a movie guy. I'm at the end of the bell. I'm a movie geek, and it's fine for me to do that. But like you said, it's these faux geeks who are getting in on it, who suddenly give a crap about the box office, which by the way is totally inflated anyway.
Well, Gone with the Wind is the most successful movie ever made.
Right. I mean,
by probably 10 times. Whatever Endgame makes.
Yeah, like proportionally
inflation,
for inflation,
number of tickets sold.
Blah, blah.
Yeah.
But, the thing is about Endgame, and I'm going to defend Endgame a little bit, I think Endgame satisfies people on an emotional level.
Oh, yeah, I cried when Iron Man died. He died. We could talk about that now.
Yeah, if you haven't seen it, come on.
If you come this far in our talk, then
really, and you haven't seen Endgame,
I was crying. I actually had tears in my eyes when he died. It moved me.
It was very sad, and
that's a testament to Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah, he's great. Look, I had huge problems with it logistically, but emotionally, the movie's fine, except for that one scene where they show all the women, which is infuriating and woke, and I hated it. But other than that shot...
Well, it did create an emotional reaction from you, though.
Yeah, one where I wanted to, punch the screen. Please. I'll even say this. The scene where Captain Marvel shows up and all the guns turn up into space, that was a cool thing.
Yeah,
I like that. And I hate Captain Marvel, but that was a cool way to show, she's super powerful and she's coming.
That was cool.
But, of course, she nearly beat Thanos by herself, which was not cool at all. But there were a lot of other problems. I don't want to get into the whole Endgame discussion. We'll be here all night.
The reason why brought it up in terms of the Peak Geek era is that this is a big jumping off point for people.
Yes.
So a lot of people, and I'm saying they barely got to this point. They had a little bit of the identity politics in there. It wasn't enough to overshadow the movie. You're like, all right, we made it. We have this nice body of work. These 22 films, I think there are.
22, yeah.
You don't need to go to any other ones after this. That's the story. If you want to bail on the MCU right now is the time. Maybe go see Spider-Man. Looks pretty good.
Yeah,
it's sort of like an epilogue to all this. So maybe see that, and then after that, you're good. You don't have to go to another one. But what we think is going to happen is that people will start to pick and choose which Marvel movies they see.
Yes, and this is the upshot, I guess, of the faux geek era, or the Peak Geek era, is that because Infinity War Endgame is over, the people who are only following it because it's popular are going to start to smell that. And they're going to start to say, well...
do I have to go see all of them now?
Yeah. Guardians of the Galaxy 3... well, Robert Downey Jr. is not in that one. And... nah, I don't want to see that. And that's the way it's going to slowly
What's this
start
Eternals thing? Eternals?
Yeah, forget Eternals.
I don't know what this is.
Good luck with that, Marvel. Jeez, you're really digging up stuff now. But it's exactly what happened with the comics. They used to have these gigantic crossovers, and everybody would try to read them. And at first, they were cool because they were novel. Crisis on Infinite Earths, the first one really that came out.
That was the first big one.
Yeah.
Wait, did Secret Wars that came out after
I
Crisis?
think it came out after, yeah.
It was like around the same
but,
year or two. Yeah, but the Crisis on Infinite Earths, that was the first really big one.
Yeah, and even those two, Crisis and Secret Wars, they didn't have a million tie-ins. Then it was later they had all the tie-ins where you had to buy every single issue of Superman and you had to buy Armageddon 2001.
Well, with Crisis, there would be a couple issues, single issues that related. Like, this is a Crisis tie-in.
Oh, yeah, there were, right.
But it wasn't like you need to buy, like, every single issue of Superman. Like, one issue or two related to it. And when you read it, it really made sense to go. It was like...
Yeah, it is when their universes were more coherent anyway, and they had editors that were actually pulling it all in together.
Editors actually doing real work.
Yeah, that's pretty much gone from DC and Marvel now. The editors that work there now, in my opinion, they're too... I don't know what the word's for it. They're too corporate. They're just sort of punching a clock, and they're kind of just hanging in there, and they don't have the power they once did. I mean, part of it's not their fault.
Like a lot of the new editors and stuff too, think it's a cool job to have.
Yeah, it's a cool job to have, but they're not steeped in the traditions, either comic book or publishing. Really, I mean that's the problem with publishing in general. I forget about comic books. All publishers in general are just degrading because everybody's doing it online. There's so many imprints and publishers now. It's not like it was before where like, oh, to work at a publisher, boy, you better have an English lit degree and you better know what you're doing. You better be very well read and maybe you've written a book or two. And now like there's a million of these guys. They're everywhere and they're desperately want to be writers, and many of them aren't writers. They're just not.
And that relates to the Peak Geek era because a lot of the fans, they don't have this shall we say education going into these movies. It's an event for them, and that's great. I mean, it's been wild to see, who would have thought even 10, 15 years ago that Avengers would be the number one movie, of all time or whatever they're saying. Who would have thought 15 years ago that would happen? It's pretty wild. It's cool in some ways, but it's exhausting now. It's too much.
Because what's happening is these fly-by-night fans, who some of them who only started like 2 movies ago are now getting on Twitter talking about it like they're experts.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay if they got on board. Great, but...
Shut your pie hole, newbie. Yeah. That's what I say.
Yeah, exactly. That's, it's annoying. And then the loudest voices on there, on Twitter especially, they're the ones who cut through. Sensible people who want to say something critical about what they're saying get shot down by the mob. So there's no like cool geek discussions. I haven't had a cool geek discussion except with like really good personal friends in a long time, and especially not online. You can't like commiserate with fellow geeks online anymore because someone's going to come in there and go, oh man, that was the worst episode of Game of Thrones ever. I can't believe how they're treating Sansa, or I can't believe that that they're making Dany the villain. This is just terrible. Like, well, did you watch Game of Thrones? Did you go back and were you there and seeing the little subtle hints along the way, or how Sansa earned her freedom, or all the things these characters went through? That it should be a celebration now. For true fans, I'm going to say the word true fans.
Yeah.
It should be a celebration like, all right, it may not be the best show like it was, but there are some really cool payoffs that they're doing. Nobody's celebrating that. They're all nitpicking about...
Too busy complaining.
Look at Arya. Arya earned the right to kill the Night King. She has been training to be an assassin since like the first episode.
Yeah, and meanwhile, all these idiots who binge watch this stuff, we were complaining about the drop-off 4 seasons ago. You people just got on board, and now you're complaining. shut your pie holes and watch the damn show for another 2 weeks. And then you're going to forget about it anyway, you faux geeks. You're going to forget all about Game of Thrones. You're going to jump on to the next thing, which I guess is going to be Star Wars. What's the next thing coming out?
There's a new Star Wars coming out, and there's some. I think what you're gonna see is there's a lot of TV shows coming out with Disney's service, Disney Plus. So I don't know if we're gonna see people start talking about that because it's gonna be like a week to week thing. You know, there's gonna be Star Wars TV shows, there's gonna be Marvel TV shows. You know, and not like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Nobody really paid attention to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Oh, I hated that show. It was a brutal show.
But with Disney Plus, I mean, they're casting, Tom Hiddleston, who was Loki. He's going to have a TV show. People are going to watch that.
Sure. I mean, they like him. But he's not going to be Loki, or is he?
He's going to be Loki, yeah.
Oh, that's crazy.
So will the Peak Geek era continue? Will it just get crazier and crazier because they're going to be able to pump out not just a movie every 3 weeks, three times a year, but TV shows like every single week? I mean, is it just going to just keep going and going and going and going, or is it going to just burst at some point and just like fall apart?
I remember when Disney fell apart, or when Disney was like struggling, and
Marvel was struggling too about the same time. Yeah.
Well, this is like back when the
80s.
Yeah, even before that, like Disney was struggling because it was only known for family movies. And family movies weren't in vogue anymore. And about the only other thing they had going were like these documentaries, and they didn't have like a division for adult, quote unquote. I don't mean like X-rated films, but like films for grown-up people. And they had been making like Escape from Witch Mountain and The Apple Dumpling Gang and stuff like that. That's all the stuff that Disney made during a certain era. And eventually people just got sick of that. They just got so sick of it. Like, those movies they weren't even that awful. They were just about as good as they were for a family fun time. But they just got sick of it because they did the same thing over and over and over. And then finally, when they finally decided to turn the boat, it took them years to develop divisions of Disney that could really pump out like a regular movie for like grown-ups, or R-rated movies. Like, that was a big thing too. When Disney finally made an R-rated movie, it was like, oh my gosh. And it wasn't Disney, it was like one of their
Miramax, Hollywood Pictures,
or something like that. I don't even remember. I want to say it was a Black Hole, but
that wasn't R-rated.
No. No. I remember they made one of their divisions made that.
It freaked me out as a kid, though. Maximilian the robot and that crazy scene of hell at the end. I mean, it's definitely... Maybe it should have been rated R. I don't know. It scared me.
But all these things go back to how I think the culture is being driven by social media, and it's
thankfully we did not have social media back then. I count myself fortunate not having a smartphone as a kid and discovering this stuff, in different ways.
Well, I think we're really seeing a backlash to social media with the next generation. Generation Z seems to disdain social media to some degree because the kind of social media that they're using is the very disposable kind, like TikTok and Snapchat and those kinds of things, which you just sort of get on and do something and then disappear. Or even Imgur, which is still kind of a viable platform, but like definitely like Facebook and Twitter are for old people at this point from their perspective.
Well, Twitter's for people who need attention.
Yeah, the woke brigade.
Yeah, Twitter is that's one site I just cannot wait for Twitter to go away. When Twitter finally like shuts its doors, however a website shuts its doors, what will really happen is it will just lose its relevance. That is going to be...
It's going to be MySpace.
It's going to be beautiful. I can't wait for it to happen.
You know what somebody said, which was an interesting pitch? They said what we should do is go back to MySpace. we should start a movement to migrate from Facebook, go back to MySpace, because Tom, who started MySpace, wasn't like Zuckerberg. He was he was more into it. I don't think he owns it anymore, but
Oh, they sold it. He
yeah.
sold it a long time ago.
But the idea being that you're rewarding a guy who treated his platform, and he did really. I mean, people just got bored of MySpace. I guess it just
Was
became
a
old.
very clunky site too, because you could customize your homepage with different like templates, and it became clunky.
Yeah,
What the uniformity aspect of it hurt it. I mean, Facebook, say what you will about the site, the blue and white color scheme has stayed with it the entire time, and they've adjusted it to make it smoother. I mean, they pumped a lot into making sure that things were quick, fast, and easily searchable. So,
but I think it's becoming the web platform for old people.
well, it has been for years.
For announcing the death of people, and for
The saddest Facebook post when people, they post pics of their pets that have passed away.
oh God, I haven't seen one
Oh,
of them.
I see a million of them.
No.
Oh, it makes me so sad.
Oh wait, I have seen one. I'm remembering one.
Oh, and they
but-
show pictures of their pets and stuff, and it's like their pet when they were a puppy or a kitten. Then it's like a picture of them when they're like, like older, and then it's a picture of them like the day before they passed away, and you're like, why are you showing me this? You feel like you lived this life. I have a real strong affinity for animals, so it really gets to me.
Yeah,
So-
why don't you edit that off your stupid site, Mark Zuckerberg? Edit people's depressing pictures with their pet, and then make the site all happy again. Because that's what's coming anyway. I mean,
Well, there's pictures of people in the hospital beds on there, like
Ugh.
like it's crazy.
yeah, or that's another thing it's for. It's to announce when you're sick and you're going in a hospital and you're having an operation. And,
Or for people to gloat about a promotion or their vacation, and there's a lot of gloating going on social media too.
yeah, I think that's kind of died down though, because I think people are so afraid to post that kind of stuff now that they're going to be criticized. But because I've
Comic
seen
book
that.
people love to gloat. The comic book people are big gloaters.
I'll tell you, I've purged so many people from. First off, I didn't have to purge anybody from Facebook because they did that for me. Because now I hardly see anybody. The algorithm only puts up people who I've like clicked on in the last year or so. So it's like you and like 4 or 5 of my friends, and I see their feed constantly.
I have 4,500 people, and I only see like 20 of the same people over and over.
Yep.
Like, shuffle it up a little bit, Facebook, surprise me. There's no surprises on Facebook.
No. And then meanwhile on Twitter, I had to like purge so many people, especially the woke people. I purged everybody who was too woke, who wouldn't shut up about Trump, who was posting resistance nonsense all day long. I just purged you. So if you haven't gotten a tweet from me in a while, feel free to tweet at me, but that's probably why, because I was sick of your stupid post.
That happened to me after the election. I'm not going to say who I voted for, but I did go a little crazy for a couple of weeks there during the 2016. Is that when it was?
Yep.
I can't remember now. But look what it matters to me now. Back then it mattered a lot. And I went a little crazy, and I lost a couple friends, and I thought about it. I'm like, you know what? I've actually hung out with those people. Like, why am I... I'll get over this eventually, And I did, and I'm friends with them again, and I'm better for it. And I stopped being wild, talking about all these emotional things. And to be fair, it was a very emotional time. I got swept up in it. But now, from a hopefully wiser perspective, I have calmed down. I've grown from it. I know what I have to do, and I'm good, People are still complaining about it, and it's really exhausting. Just like the Peak Geek era, it's exhausting to deal with it. You don't want to hear about it, so even if you do have a valid opinion about whatever political thing is going on, I don't want to listen to you because you've exhausted me. And that's what's happening with the geek stuff, too.
Yeah.
Your opinion about Game of Thrones doesn't flippin' matter. I don't care what you think about Game of Thrones. I know what I think. I'm cool with certain things, I'll talk with my friends about it, in private. But I don't have to, hear what you have to say about it on Twitter. you don't matter. And you're just going to have to realize you don't matter.
It's the last 2 weeks of the show. Just shut up. Shut up. Who cares at this point? Just watch the last 2 weeks of the show. You know, the same thing happened to The Sopranos. And I bailed on The Sopranos like 2 or 3 seasons before it ended. Because same thing happened, but it didn't really. Unlike Game of Thrones, which I think kind of recovered somewhat. Although Sopranos weren't based on the books. I don't think The Sopranos could really recover because of the death of the actress who played the mother. And
well, that was second season too. I mean, she was gone after the second season, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, the show wasn't the same after she was gone. She was amazing.
Yeah,
that character really drove that show.
Yep. And with her gone, it just turned into like this mafia drama that was so too serious.
Very melodramatic.
Whereas I don't know if people remember, but the early trailers for The Sopranos, it was really marketed as a light comedy with mafia stuff in it. And there were some funny episodes. And even late in the game, they threw in a couple when I was still watching. But for the most part, it just became dreary and too serious because it was too successful. And that's what's ruining a lot of these franchises' success. Because so many people get involved and there's so much money at stake. Then it's like what's happened to Star Wars, which is like, okay, give us the new Star Wars movie. Oh, it's just like the old Star Wars movie? Perfect.
Yep. Well, with you bailing on Sopranos, I actually bailed on it too. I went back, which is really weird. I loved the show. Like, I loved it.
Yeah,
I couldn't
me too.
get enough of it. And then all of a sudden I find myself like I'm out, which is weird because I love the show. Like, why am I not watching this anymore? To Game of Thrones credit, I'm sticking to the end, and I'm glad it's ending. I'm glad there's not another couple seasons because I couldn't take any more of this.
No.
And we should all be thankful that a show that is a fantasy show with dragons, and before this, really nothing with dragons has been successful.
Fantasy shows weren't successful. How about all the shows they've launched? They launched that. I remember that like ABC sitcom that took place in a fantasy world.
Oh yeah,
that tanked. It's been.
They did a Dungeons and Dragons cartoon that didn't last long,
and that was a good cartoon.
It was good.
That was a good cartoon. At least the first season was really good, and then kind of got a little off kilter the second season, but it was still cool. And it's just, look, if you're a faux fan, you're not listening to this because you don't care. You don't listen to podcasts about other geeks complaining about stuff. That's like way too hardcore for you.
Well, we've reached a new meta level of geeks complaining about geeks.
Yeah. And so let's talk about what's going to happen next. Let's talk about our predictions for the post-geek apocalypse. There's your
title, the Geek Apocalypse.
The Geek Apocalypse, yes.
The Geek Apocalypse.
Here's what I think's going to happen. All right, for Star Wars is already spread too thin. The 9th movie would have been a perfect time to kind of wrap it up for a little while. But then they announced 3 new movies on top of that.
They're going to wait 3 years for the new movies to come out. And I think that it's either the Game of Thrones guys doing it or the Last Jedi director. He should not be named.
Yeah, it's not. That's not going to be good, in my view.
But they're doing TV shows, and to be honest with you, Tony, I'm excited about the TV shows. I saw The Mandalorian. It's got Pedro Pascal, who was Oberyn in Game of Thrones. Great actor. He's playing a bounty hunter. He looks great. It's got a great cast. Giancarlo Esposito's in it. Carl Weathers is in it. He plays like a guy who gives missions, I guess, to the Mandalorian. I think it's going to be awesome. I am really excited about it because I loved Rogue One, which is a more down and gritty type Star Wars movie, akin to like The Empire Strikes Back, which is like a gritty war movie. That's the kind of Star Wars stuff that I'm into. So I think with that, you're going to pick and choose. I don't want to see something like Last Jedi. I want to see something like Rogue One or The Mandalorian or whatever. So I will watch it. I'm in on it. So I'm not completely out on Star Wars, at least for me. I know you are.
I'm out. Okay.
Well, you've been out since The Phantom Menace in 1999.
And the reason I'm out is because once you ruin the universe for me, I can't watch it anymore. Unless you're going to fix the universe. Now, I'll give some cred to J.J. Abrams for his first Star Trek movie. Because despite the fact it's a rehash of everything, he had a good explanation for the rehash. And even though it was time travel done in a way that I could accept.
It was a fun movie.
Yeah.
I really don't have anything bad to say about the first Star Trek. And the cast was great.
Cast is great. The second one, however, to go right into the Wrath of Khan was, to me, like pissing in the face of the fans. Like, here was your opportunity to go in a completely new, bold direction. You reset the clock. Perfect. Now you can do whatever you want. Oh, we're going to do the same thing. Why even do it? Why even do the first movie then? Why not just, hey, let's just remake the movies? I mean, that's what this is all turning into. It's just turning into, they're going to make 12, 15, 21 movies, and they're just going to rotate them every 7 years and keep remaking them over and over and over again with different actors, slightly different premises, slightly different sets and takes, and oh, it'll be so great. No, it won't, because people will eventually just burn out on it. I mean, look at James Bond.
Oh, I still like James Bond.
Right, but they've hurt the franchise. I mean, it's not what it was. It's just not. They brought it back somewhat. Daniel Craig brought it back with Casino Royale.
Casino Royale is a great movie.
Great movie, because it's based on an Ian Fleming novel.
Well, that we can talk about that then. The source material. In Peak Geek era, a lot of the faux fans, as Tony calls them. I'm still debating on that faux fan thing. I'm going to use it, though. I'm going to use it. The faux fans, they could care less about the source material, but those of us who have spent years with these things, the source material is important. And with The Force Awakens, the source material was another movie. It wasn't even based on a book. It was a remake of Star Wars. So that's what they want to do. They don't want to have to pay for new stories to be written. They just want to take what they have and just, clone it, recycle it, rehash it, rebrand it, repeat it, because it's less investment for them. But in the long run, I think it's going to hurt them and it's going to dilute it.
It's exactly what happened in comics. Exactly.
I was out of comics in 2003. I saw it. I'm like, I'm out. This is getting boring.
Well, but here's what happened, and here's why it got boring. It's because all the creators died, retired, or just got cut out.
And they didn't bring anybody new that was good in, really.
They can't. And here's why. Because if you're in a meeting, let's say you're in a meeting about, the Superman titles, and you got the writers, and you got the artists, and you've got the editors, and whoever. You're having a meeting about where you're going to take Superman. Who calls the shots? If the creators of Superman are there, you could all turn to them as like, well, we got these ideas and these ideas. What do you think? And the creator can go, yes, or no. That would be something Superman would never do. But without them there, the only people to make those decisions are just guys punching a clock.
Corporate suits.
And why are they making these decisions? Well, they're trying to further their own careers, or they're trying to please people above them.
Or they just think it's a cool job to have.
Or whatever. Or they have a political agenda and they don't really need to produce anything. Part of the problem with the big two right now in comics is they don't have to make money, really. Their profit margins are superfluous because they're owned by these major corporations, and they're basically a write-off.
But what's strange about this in the Peak Geek era is that they're not benefiting from the success of the movies or the TV shows and being the geek culture being at its apex. They're not benefiting at all.
No, because the movies are like the old comics for the most part, and they're stripped down, sleek versions a lot of times of what the comic was in spirit. So it's the core of what made those stories great.
Well, plus the faux fans could give a shit less about the source material. The faux fans aren't going to go into a comic book shop and buy, the movies the comic books that they're based on.
No.
So you're getting like short-term success here. The Peak Geek success you're seeing, the box office numbers for Avengers. This is it. It's the peak. It's the pinnacle of success. I mean, great job. I mean, well earned.
Yeah.
But this is it. You're never going to see another movie in this geek realm reach this height again. It's going to be downhill from here.
Yeah, I mean, are they going to have Samuel L. Jackson in a wheelchair 10 years from now playing Nick Fury?
Well, he would do it.
I'm sure he would. And I'm sure it would be kind of cool on some level, but...
They might roll him out for a cameo. Oh my God, I said roll him out. I swear that was...
But, at some point, they're going to replace him too. And once they replace all these guys, look, Phase 4 of the MCU looks terrible to me. It's just going to be nowhere to go but down. And the moment these movies stop making money is the moment they're going to start cutting and cutting and cutting. And the first thing they do, and this happened during the Aliens movie, first thing they do is start cutting the money and start cutting actors. And when they couldn't cut, I believe it was Sigourney Weaver's salary. Like, she had negotiated a good contract. I believe it was for Aliens 3. So they instead cut the money from the special effects in the set.
It is a depressing movie.
Yeah, and it's brutal. And originally, Aliens 3, it was going to be 3 different aliens. It was going to be one gestated in a dog, one gestated in a bull, and one gestated in a gorilla, I believe, were the 3. So what did they do? They had to cut it down to just the dog because they didn't have the money to do the other 2. It's like, that's what you get. You're going to get a cut down. You're going to get a cut rate version of the MCU, which will further spiral down.
Just like they didn't have enough money to put Ghost in the Battle of the Bastards.
Yep.
The direwolf who just pops up every now and then. Anyway.
And getting back to what I was saying about the whole corporate meeting, you can't get an answer on what Superman story we're going to do. So they just end up picking a story based on the careerists who are just punching a clock to try to get to the next thing. They don't have any real emotional investment in the creations anymore. No one does. And even if you don't have that, you at least could have someone there who's a creator who could say, yes, no, maybe, let's try it, whatever. Because at least the creative visionaries are the guys who did something crazy or are willing to entertain that. Now, I don't like the prequels, but I respect George Lucas for shooting them. And he tried something different. In my opinion, they fail. But...
what a glorious failure, though.
Yeah. At least they were different. At least there were different characters in them that he created. I mean, I don't like any of them.
I liked Count Dooku.
Yeah. But, at least
you didn't like Darth Maul?
He tried. I hated Darth Maul. I hated Darth Maul because he spends the whole movie brooding, and then they just kill him at the end.
Yeah, but I don't know if, like, a lot of the faux fans won't remember this, but true fans remember. They built Darth Maul up to be, like, he was going to be awesome.
Yeah.
Like he was going to be this guy who was an unstoppable force, like, scary. And there was a couple really cool, when they do the music and he shows up and the dual lightsabers, that was pretty cool. The double-sided lightsaber, that was a pretty sweet scene. And the battle scene's cool, but they built him up to be bigger than he was. It was false advertising.
Yeah. Yeah, that happens a lot in Hollywood. They build up these movies. I thought, the surprise in the movie for me was that he died. I thought, whoa, I didn't expect that to happen. He
really didn't die. He was at the end of Solo in a cameo, which is weird.
Yeah, but that was before he died.
No, it was after.
It was?
Yeah, it was after. He was still alive. They found him and he had robotic legs, if you look back at that shot. Yeah, he's in the one of the cartoons is supposed to be considered canon, and he's like brought back. He's like a
Oh, I heard in one of the video games.
Yeah, he's a gangster.
Yeah.
And that's why Solo takes place way after Phantom Menace.
It does?
Yeah.
Oh. I don't know the timeline anymore. I'm
See?
out. I'm out of Star Wars.
He's out. So you think Star Wars? What's going to happen with Star Wars? We're gonna wrap this up here in a little bit. So,
all right, Star Wars. Give me your take. You're the Star Wars fan.
Well, I just told you I'm in on the Mandalorian.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna go see Rise of Skywalker. It's like my parents love it. You know, my brothers, they love it. So we talk about it. So they got my money. Am I gonna like it? We'll see. I didn't like The Last Jedi. I watched The Force Awakens again, and it doesn't bother me. I actually kind of like The Force Awakens after all the hype died down. I gave it a couple years. I went back. I'm like, you know what? I actually kind of like this movie. But I cannot sign off on The Last Jedi. I just can't. What they did there, it hurt me. I walked out of the theater with like a sick feeling. And for a couple of days, I felt sick. It was crazy that's what it did to me. And it did to a lot of other people too. And they talked about it online. And part of the the Peak Geek problem is that if I didn't voice that opinion online because I would get attacked. Like, oh, you're a terrible person. You just don't understand it. It's like over your head. Like, no, I know what I felt and I know what I saw. And I'm a writer. I know what good stories are. And that was calculated to do that to people. And it felt insulting to me. But anyway, I've forgiven Star Wars for that. I'm going to check out The Mandalorian. I'm going to check out... doing another show with Diego Luna from Rogue One. He's going to be in a prequel. I'm in. I'm in, Tony.
I would like to see. Here's what I would like to see.
Screw Last Jedi and screw you, Rian Johnson.
I would like to see Disney launch their channel and make all their shows exclusive, and then die on the channel. I'd like to see the whole channel die, even though The Simpsons are going to end up on there, Disney, and I love The Simpsons. But
I think Disney Plus is going to be a mad success.
For a while, it will be. For a while. But after a while, I think...
I'm going to get it.
I could care so little about that. I mean, you know, Netflix, anything but Disney. Anything but Disney for me.
I'm going to get it. I know. As much as I complain about a lot of stuff. And I used to work for Disney, and I got screwed over, not by Disney, but, you know, forces beyond my control. So I should hold some animosity, but I'm like, you know what? Just like I forgave the 2016 political debacle, I can move past this. And I can forgive the faux geeks when they go away, because they will go away.
Well, I don't see how Disney can support that channel when that happens.
Well, they'll have hardcore people still around.
Right, but like when they have a hardcore fan base for like Disney princesses, let's say.
Oh, I'm one of them.
Sure. But how many people are there really? So
yeah, it'd be interesting to see the numbers.
What is Disney Plus going to become other than here's another family channel? I mean, they already have the Disney Channel. You know, CBS is doing this thing with Star Trek, which...
CBS All Access. And they do the Twilight Zone in there, too.
Yeah. And it's like...
Which I'm not paying for.
I was the biggest Twilight Zone fan.
Biggest Star Trek fan.
Biggest Star Trek fan. I'm not watching any of that. None of it interests me at all.
You could care less.
Yeah. Like, why? Why would I care? Now, if you told me... You know, Black Mirror interests me, even though
great. I love
it's basically a new Twilight Zone, but because it's new, because it's not the Twilight Zone, because it's called something else and it has a different reputation, it's made by different creators, that to me is more interesting because it's new. And Black Mirror is fabulous. I mean, it's fabulous.
It almost reached Peak Geek, though, with that Bandersnatch episode. That was like... People were talking about that quite a bit online.
I liked it.
It was good, but...
I mean, look, it was Choose Your Own Adventure, so it was going to be weird and clunky. But I thought, this is cool. It's different. It's cool. It's interesting. New is cool and interesting. And I think people eventually, even the faux geeks, eventually get on board with that. It may take them a while, but they eventually get on board with that and they just go, and they shut down, they shut off, and they're done. They're just done with this stuff. When they shut off for the MCU and Star Wars, and they will,
So you're saying that
it'll just die
you're saying both Star Wars and the MCU are going to fade
eventually.
Well, eventually, yeah.
You look at X-Files. How big was X-Files? I mean, it was massive. They were asking for, when I was writing scripts during that time, you could not write a conspiracy theory. Like, you had to write conspiracy theory stuff in your scripts. Like, during that era, during that 90s, like, everything was X-Files. Everything. Absolutely everything. And then it was just done. And it was dead. They killed it.
They did, yeah. There was a couple good episodes in the last couple seasons, but yep, you're right. It faded. And they tried to bring it back, and it wasn't as good.
Now, Star Wars and
bigger,
the MCU are much bigger. So it's going to take much longer.
Exponentially bigger.
Much longer for them to die. But the overhead to sustain them is also much bigger. So at some point, someone is going to have to look at the numbers and go, oh no, if something big fails.
Oh, I think, yeah, definitely. Eventually, they will fade. Nothing lasts forever. So,
look at Star Trek. Star Trek is, Discovery's doing kind of okay, I guess. It's hard to figure it out because it's not on regular TV anymore, but it's not Next Generation. Next Generation was fairly popular.
It was extremely popular. Next Generation's numbers were like, if Next Generation, I think, was a show today, it would be the number one show.
Really?
Based on the numbers. Yeah.
What about Deep Space Nine?
No, not Deep Space Nine or Voyager. It wasn't.
Voyager was awful. Oh my God.
It wasn't as big, but I actually read up on the numbers for Next Generation, and because they had an interesting syndicated model where it didn't even it would air at different times on different stations, but the combined viewership was more than probably that stupid show The Big Bang Theory got.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
It was massive.
So, yeah, but I don't think, Discovery can't be doing anything close to that, I don't think.
These streaming services don't release the numbers for how many actual, sales. We're doing pretty well here, They just renewed the Twilight Zone for a second season, so.
And when you talk about streaming and stuff on the internet, you can compare it to everything on the internet. Like Yahoo had a series that took place in space, and I forget the name, but it was really good. And I watched the whole first season. It was funny. It was scientifically okay. It was about the crew had a brother and sister dynamic, but they kind of hated each other. It was a lot of fun. I wish I could remember the name. But, that's competing. Along with any Yahoo who shoots his own stupid sci-fi thing and puts it on YouTube, and if not YouTube, BitChute, which you should check out, by the way.
Well, that's one thing, too, that they're going to have to compete against is that people, you're going to eventually be able to do your own TV shows if you're talented. You'll be able to do it on your own. And eventually, in the next 10, 15 years, people will be able to compete against the MCU with their own movies and stuff, hopefully. That's what I would like to see.
Well, already the special effects, that people could do in their laptop are amazing to me.
So there would have to be people who are good storytellers, and that's where a lot of these things fail, is they don't have good stories back in, their fancy special effects.
Yeah, it's like when you see animators do their sample, but they don't have, it's great animation, but they don't really have a story. It's just a guy running down the street or something, and there's kind of a story, but not really.
So yeah, there's a challenge to people. We'll wrap it up. So that's what you think about the MCU and Star Wars. Game of Thrones, they're doing prequels. You're out?
I don't know. You'd have to get me on board. Are they based on the books? They're not.
Yeah,
right?
They're based on his stories. They take place, in the past.
But they're not based on novels directly, like the Game of Thrones was?
No.
Yeah.
They're based on his stories, I guess, yeah. The
so.
history of Westeros.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it's going to be Game of Thrones season 1.
I'm in.
That's what I want. I want it again. I want Game of Thrones season 1 again. The only way you're going to get that is you're going to have to get George R.R. Martin books. And there's more books, right? He has more books.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're Game of Thrones books, or Westeros books, but he's got more books. They should just take his other books and start making stuff out of them.
They're going to do 3 Game of Thrones prequels.
It's too many. It's too many. Look, if you want to get my attention, you're going to have to be able to do what Martin did in Game of Thrones books, which is all this layering, all these characters dying left and right. I'll tell you what I like is that Altered Carbon show.
Oh, I love that show.
That's a fun show with a great premise. You're going to have a different main character every season, basically, or a different actor playing the main character. He doesn't have a body.
Yeah.
Which is so awesome. I mean, they have an actor to play his original body, but like he barely speaks in the show, which is interesting too. So, I mean, that to me is the future of these, sci-fi shows, like hard science stuff that's going to take people a lot more drilling down to get used to. And of course, the fragmentation of, now we're in the sci-fi fantasy. I think, one of the reasons we're into these things and why all the faux geeks have come to them is because sci-fi and fantasy are still 2 genres that don't have, at least from the perspective of the guys who make this stuff, they haven't fragmented their audiences yet. Like there's not enough fantasy to fragment into one kind of fantasy and another kind of fantasy. There's not yet quite enough, maybe a little bit too much because you got Star Trek and Star Wars, but imagine other kinds of sci-fi then fragmenting that. You know what I'm saying? It's like there's not enough different kinds of it. And I think eventually when it fragments, it's going to be the faux fan, like mainstream stuff, and then it'll be the hard science stuff, more like The Expanse.
I agree.
All right. And with that, we're going to wrap it up, fanboys. Thanks for tuning in. This has been Life Skills for Fanboys here with Tony D and CB. Thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see you next time.